quick reminder, each episode could contain some game spoilers, so please listen or watch with discretion. And now, your hosts for The Gamer's Advocate, AMKomnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
Well, welcome to another episode of The Gamer's Advocate, where we discuss many things within the subject of gaming. You get 1,000 gamers in a room, you might get 1,000 different opinions, and we like to discuss games that we love to hate and hate to love. Today's topic is going to be about the protagonists in many games, whether they are considered a chosen one versus someone that is actually chosen in the game. And there might be some variability within some of these games and how they define that. But before we go down that road, are there any games that you guys have been playing that's captivated your interest lately?
Want to go first, Banana?
Sure. So I have gone back to a game I played years ago at this point, a game called Code Vein, which I personally think is a hidden gem within the Soulsborne category. I always recommend it as kind of my introduction to Souls games for any players looking to get into that category of gaming. It's not a FromSoft game, but I believe the publisher is the same as Dark Souls 2 and 3. It's Bandai Namco. And it is essentially a Souls game with an anime aesthetic. I just think overall it's really well done. It is, I would say, considerably easier than any other Souls game I've played. But there's a story to it. There's world building. There's wonderful music. There are a bunch of characters, each with their own story, and you kind of get to experience everybody's story a little bit. All of them are tragic, but it's still really well done. And I think it has replayability. There's absolutely the opportunity for challenge runs. You start with a weapon that is almost useless. You could theoretically play through the entire game using that weapon. And they've even introduced kind of incentive to do those challenge runs with the DLC, because there are individual challenges in the DLC that you get rewarded for. And using the pipe that you get at the very beginning to beat very difficult bosses is already programmed into the game. I'm a huge fan of the game overall. And I think the idea that it's not well known is a little frustrating to me, but I'm a huge fan.
When you said it has a story, is that a real narrative in the sense that we often find missing from Dark Souls, Elden Ring, etc., where there is a story in those games, but you have to piece it together yourself? In Code Vein, is the game actually giving you characters with real dialogue that's progressing you through the game?
Oh, absolutely. So you immediately meet one of the characters who will kind of accompany you throughout the story, and the two of you have no memory of who you are or what your whole deal is. And you kind of get the immediate world building because you are taken prisoner and forced to work immediately by people who seem a little desperate for workers. And as you kind of play through the game, you learn the state of the world and why it is that these people are so desperate to find people to put to work. And you play through this story, learning more about the world and finally figuring out what kind of the big bad that governs all of this is. And I honestly think the ending of the game is set up for a sequel, and I'm a little disappointed that it never got one. But there is definitely a through story that you experience throughout the entire game. There's a kind of deliberate narrative that you absolutely get, and you don't have to dig for it. You can dig to get additional details. You can play through optional elements of the game to delve into more world building, but the story itself is there. You just might not get the full experience unless you put in a little extra effort.
So would you say it's more like a Souls-like then?
I feel like I don't know what that word means. I feel like this
See you on a future
is
podcast.
a Souls game. Without the name Dark Souls. I feel like the combat is very similar. It's very much dodge or parry or block and build your character towards one of those designs. And then you have the freedom to build your character as somebody who's going to swing a giant weapon around and occasionally land a hit that deals a ton of punishing damage, or somebody who's going to dart in, deal a little bit of chip damage, and dart back out. Or you might be primarily a caster type, and you'll need to balance regenerating your mana pool, or whatever the term is. I believe it's ichor in this game. The resource that allows you to use those unique abilities. And there's a lot of variability in how you can build your character. Unlike the way Dark Souls games are kind of structured, where you'll get a weapon and build your character around that weapon, or you'll get a spell and build your character around that spell. You get various classes throughout the game, and each class comes with a few inherent abilities which you can master by playing as that class and getting kills. And then those mastered abilities become available on every class. So you can choose a class which kind of determines your base stats, and then pull in bonuses from other classes or abilities from other classes, and kind of mix and match until you find something that suits you. And you can kind of choose your course to thanks,
Yep.
Kiki. You can kind of choose your course to gain different classes as you progress, and some of the decisions that you make throughout the game will impact the classes that are available to you. So if you really know what you're doing, you can get every class in the game on your second playthrough. And then you'll have access to all of those abilities if you put in the time to master everything, and you can build whatever you want at that point. But I think it's really a seemingly unknown but really well done game. And I feel like, coming from me, that's special, because I don't care for most games.
Yeah, the class combo stuff. Titan Quest is very similar to that. You can merge very different types of backgrounds. Let's say you want to do like fire magic or something, and nature magic. You can combine those two things that don't really, you would think on the surface, have anything to do with each other, but as you put points into them, you get kind of like the original, well, Diablo 2, I guess. You could take a very simple attribute or ability and make it super powerful based on your levels and how many points you put into it. It's like I said, Titan Quest is a very unique game, but the combination of structures within the classes is kind of similar to that, I guess.
So I'm currently playing Baldur's Gate, and I think
Baldur's
as
Gate 2?
something of a rarity, yeah, it's not Baldur's Gate 3, it's Baldur's Gate 2. And this is because I bounced off Baldur's Gate 3. So I played Baldur's Gate 1 a few years ago and had a really good time, particularly on the reduced difficulty levels. I thought that's really the sweet spot for Baldur's Gate, because the story is so good that to play it on easy mode, or as I did, story mode, really lets you just enjoy the narrative and you don't have to worry about anything else. Baldur's Gate 3 I've played in the last year or so, I just bounced off. I didn't find it that interesting. I think the problem it had was it was vastly oversold to me. It felt like I almost couldn't go through any online gaming session, any Twitch stream, whatever it might be, without someone telling me how good Baldur's Gate 3 was. Almost it becomes a victim of its own success. So I was expecting this beautifully written, unique, interesting RPG, and what I got was a finely written, seen this before, good RPG. Which isn't a bad thing. We need those games, but I didn't like it that much. And I've decided to go back and give Baldur's Gate 2 a try. and really see which of these games is my favorite so far. I'm only a few hours in. I've just done the first major dungeon and found my way through a terrifying circus tent. So I'm about 3 hours into the entire game. And I will say, until now, I'm finding it much more interesting. Really having a great time. I think it introduces itself really strongly.
How did you do with the algebra problem at the beginning of the circus tent?
Oh, I just did the algebra. I can do algebra, yeah. You're talking about the age that someone is?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just worked it out.
Did you really? I
Yeah.
thought that was so absurdly difficult when I first played it. Admittedly, I was 9, so...
I'm also studying university level maths. If I couldn't do it, I'd probably have to leave. I think it's on the test, actually. You have to play Baldur's Gate 2 and you have to do the circus.
Good to know.
Yeah. But so I've been really, really enjoying the first few hours. I think I'm probably going to take to it a lot more than I did Baldur's Gate 3. And who knows, it might even then open me up to playing Baldur's Gate 3 again in the future. But there's something about the way that those games are. Even though I'm currently playing the Enhanced Edition, I love that frozen in time aspect of them. Where if you play a game today, unless it's Pillars of Eternity, you're not going to be playing Baldur's Gate 2 again. We've done that kind of game. We've moved on. We don't make them anymore. And I love that this is there still as this time capsule almost of the probably the best, or up there with Planescape Torment and Neverwinter Nights and a few others, as a true best surviving example of what this genre of game once was. So I've really been enjoying just being able to go back and play what is in many ways the apex of this style of game. And I think Legion, of course, you're a massive fan of this series, and you really always have been.
Yeah. I think Pathfinder really does a good justice to the isometric. It's not the same. It's really hard for me to comment on that. But if you like the aesthetic of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, you're probably going to like Pathfinder, especially the most recent one, Wrath of the Righteous. I mean, that's, as far as a story-based game, it is. The class system is not Dungeons and Dragons. It's its own, but it is very in depth and it's very well balanced too. But there's so many options that you don't even know where to begin. It's very easy for a new player to that series to say, I really couldn't figure it out, so I kind of gave up. I would not be shocked. So
this is almost my problem with Baldur's Gate 2 at times, and it's why I'm trying to slowly play. So I think I say I've probably done 3 or 4 hours total and just done these opening dungeon and this second mini dungeon, and that's not fast. I think you could do them a lot quicker, but I've taken the time to open my spell books, look what everything is, trying to understand it, because I don't play D&D, I don't play AD&D, whatever it is. So when I read spells like Hold Person or Call Lightning, I don't know exactly what they are. You can normally guess, but I didn't realize, for example, you can't do Call Lightning indoors, which makes all the sense in the world. But then all of a sudden, when I was saving it, and then I had a chance to use it, so I thought, and then couldn't, I was a bit overwhelmed by the thought of, sugar, what do I do now? But I'm really trying to spend a bit of time now understanding it so I can go through the game without feeling overwhelmed, which I did at the end of Baldur's Gate 1, with sometimes the spell books of certain characters, finding myself thinking, I don't know what half of these are. I'm just going to make sure everyone has Magic Missile and Hold Person.
Well, some of those old rule sets really did a good job of like taking an overpowered spell like Call Lightning and limiting where you and who can use it. So yeah, it's a good example. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like particularly with second edition, the gameplay is pretty straightforward outside of spellcasting. As soon as you get into spellcasting, the complexity skyrockets because there's just so many different spells with different effects, and some of them are just damaging, some of them are more strategic, some of them are area of effect, kind of area of denial, more like, and you can shape the battleground with those, and that's a lot harder to kind of balance in your mind because you're kind of thinking in terms of how much damage can I deal or how much damage can I prevent. And when you say I'm going to web this area so I'm not fighting those few enemies, that's a clear indication of damage you're not taking. unless they make a save, and then you're taking damage again.
Yeah. And that oddly enough, that idea of the combat really being simple and then gaining in complexity by orders of magnitude when you find yourself using spells. I remember the first time I opened a spell, and I think it said humanoid was the target. And then it said something like, and this includes, for example, and there were about 16 different things listed. But the one specific thing I was looking for wasn't listed. So I found myself in this moment of, I guess if I played this game and I knew these rules, I would know if I can use this spell on that target. Turns out I could. It just wasn't listed in that long list of potential humanoids. So I'm still in the trial and error phase.
Mhm.
And that's oddly enough why I want to go and play a different isometric RPG in the next few weeks. I've got Wasteland 3 waiting to be played. And I'm very much
I
looking
know
for...
that
Is it 3 or 2? I can't remember. It's the newest one. I think it's 3.
I would guess 3 is newer than 2.
They remastered 1 and 2, so they're very playable. And if you don't know, if the audience listening or watching doesn't know Wasteland, it's the precursor. Well, it's not a precursor. It highly influenced Fallout, the original Fallout. So if you like the original Fallout, I'm surprised how many people have gone. It's like I'm gonna do like Fallout, kind of like similar to Baldur's Gate. I'm gonna do it on hard mode. I'm gonna do it with the mods and make whatever. But if you like that aspect of Fallout, I'm surprised how many people haven't actually played Wasteland, because it was. I mean, to me, it's like Fallout 1, really. Fallout 1 and 2. But
You
I
might
feel like we
recognize
have talked about Wasteland because it's now sounding familiar.
You might recognize the cover. There's a very famous robot they have that's almost like a giant scorpion that you may have seen. But yeah,
Like
as
Final
Legion
Fantasy
said,
VII,
almost. I
obviously.
was just thinking that. A spiritual precursor to the Fallout series that was then reborn, I think in around 2014 or so, a few years after Fallout had been rebooted into the modern generation, where it became more like Skyrim.
Fallout 3, basically, when Bethesda took it over, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then this became the spiritual descendant of Fallout 1, Fallout 2, and the original Wasteland game. So you have this actual old-style video game being produced now under the banner of Wasteland. And if you like Fallout, the universe, you may well like that kind of game if you enjoy the isometric RPGs.
Wasteland is an incredibly balanced game, so I definitely encourage people to play that game, especially if you like Fallout, because you should. I can't say you will. You should probably enjoy Wasteland. So
Well, I had a blast with Wasteland 2, and I've heard that Wasteland 3 is pretty much an across-the-board improvement. So I'm very much looking forward to getting it.
Yeah. For me, I've been playing lately. Well, I'm always playing a bunch of games, to be honest. But I recently fell back into Star Wars: The Old Republic. I've never stopped playing that game, but I've never really gone in and done a playthrough where I thought, well, this is interesting to me, because I've already done it. I've sunk so many hours into that game. But Banana probably knows this about me, but I'm very much a dark side person. I attune myself to the Sith. Probably 90 to 95% of my time is spent playing as an Empire or Sith player.
If only there was a word for that, like evil or something.
But I went ahead and decided, I said, what if I did a light side playthrough, which was, I have done them, I've done it to end game, but I haven't really done them in years. I haven't really thought about them. So I thought, let me give that a shot. So I decided to fire up an actual Jedi and play light side. But the nice thing about that game is that you can take certain decisions and decide, I don't really agree with the entire light side idea for this scenario or whatever. So I wanted to take my character and grow them as a burgeoning light side user, and then start questioning things once I get to, like, maybe say level 25 or something like that. And then maybe even start going to the dark side. So I kind of like being able to create that type of character that somewhat malleable, but yeah.
Deceived. And now your republic shall fall.
today's topic about, I guess, the chosen one. Could you really kind of expand upon that, Banana? Because you do a really good job of describing this subject.
Sure. I think the driving idea behind this was, in a lot of stories, you'll be presented with a protagonist who is almost chosen by fate to play a role in the way events play out. And the counterpoint to that would be a protagonist who is not special by birth. They are simply another person, typically playing their role until a choice is forced on them. So rather than being the chosen one, they choose to be special. And I think you'll find in a lot of stories, both of those work. It's just kind of almost a matter of taste, but also more a matter of the story you're trying to tell. I think probably the most obvious example of the chosen one would be Star Wars, because Obi-Wan literally shouts, "You were the chosen one" at Anakin. Makes it pretty clear.
Just because that film was normally so subtle.
Yeah. And you'll see that exact kind of reality play out in video gaming as well, to say that a character was born special. Having just spoken about Baldur's Gate, playing Baldur's Gate 2, the main character of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 is born special. Won't go into the exact details about that because it is a major element of Baldur's Gate 1, so don't want to
Perhaps
spoil that.
as a very minor version of explaining what makes our character special, just think of how your character dies and the other characters die. Just if you're playing that game for the first time. If your main character dies, game's over. Everyone else dies, you can bring them back. Could be a nice way to think about it without diving too much into the spoilers of the whys.
Mm-hmm. But ultimately, it elevates that main character to a position where they are the only one who can progress this story, who can reach the conclusion of this story because of the nature of their specialness. And on kind of the other end of the spectrum is a character who by their own choices elevates themselves to that position, rather than chance kind of deciding that they will be the protagonist. They are simply another person who was in a position to make that choice, and because of the choice they made, they became special. And I think I love games that fall into each of those categories, but I think it's an interesting topic to dive into as to which characters do you relate to more, which games do you gravitate towards, and when do you really kind of lose interest in a chosen protagonist being elevated kind of outside of their control, and kind of being selected as somebody special and potentially not being really all that special.
So where would you put like a character like from Fable?
So I think Fable would probably be along the lines of well, that's actually a really good question, because it is kind of a balance. In Fable and Fable 2, you are kind of just a hero, which is a generic title given to people who are a bit exceptional, more or less, as kind of a general way of putting it. You have the ability to do things that other people can't, but you're not necessarily immediately elevated to that position. There's a process of growing your abilities. And in all of the Fable games, the choices you make are hugely important. But the reason you get to make those choices is because you were born a hero. So I feel like that is the kind of middle ground between these two, where You're not necessarily the only person who can play this part, but you are a member of a select group. And not everybody else gets to enter that group. It is kind of defined by birth. You, through no fault of your own, for lack of a better phrase, are a hero. You were decided by fate to be a hero. And that means you get to make those other decisions. So I would probably lean more towards the chosen one category, because you don't really meet too many other heroes in Fable. There's a handful of them, and there's nobody who kind of represents you as a failed attempt. You don't meet heroes who suck.
I'd like to draw you maybe into another series, which has a very similar approach, I believe, because I've only played Fable 1, and this was many, many years ago. I've largely forgotten the game. But that idea, by the way, of almost through no fault of your own, I think the idea is essentially the character is born on third base and thinks they hit a triple.
Mm-hmm.
It's that idea. And the series that I wanted to dive into, particularly the third, fourth, and fifth games, is the Elder Scrolls. And I think across those three games, you have almost three different versions of this potential chosen one, or the one who isn't. So if we do the fifth one first, because it's the easiest, Skyrim, you are very much the chosen one. You are the Dragonborn. You have this special power only within you that perhaps a very select group, if I remember correctly, have had over the years. But really, as you are the one who can do this, who can profit from all of these ancient dragon walls around the world, who can take the souls of these dragons. And without you, that world is going to walk a very, very different path. If you
Until
aren't there,
the
there
DLC.
is...
You find out there's another one.
Shush! DLC isn't canon, right, chat? The game, if you're not there and this other, Alduin wins. There is no other solution without you. Then you've got Oblivion. I don't think you're the chosen one because Martin is. You have an entirely different hero, and you're essentially playing a secondary protagonist role in their hero story. To the point where even that other character will kill the final boss for you. I don't care if we're spoiling Oblivion. If you haven't played Oblivion by now, you probably don't want to play it. These characters, they are fighting their own war, and you're there existing in the world that they're in. And I feel that strikes a very different tone to what Skyrim does, but you also have to consider that you have that one little extra bit at the beginning of the game when the Emperor tells you that he's seen you in his dreams. So you're not the chosen one, but you're clearly fated to be involved in what's going on.
Yeah, you're the hero of
And then
Kavach, not so much hero Oblivion.
Yeah, you become a hero through your own actions of something much more tangible than just the game as a whole. You are the hero of Kavach, the title that really sticks with you the most, I think, through the entire game. And then you've got Morrowind, where I'm firmly of the belief that there's nothing special about you. Nothing. Except my theory falls apart because they have enough little details that I might not be right. So I'm just making a few little notes whilst we were talking about this. Morrowind, there is a prophecy. But it's so vague and so broad that it almost feels as though it was written down and put in place so that if anything were ever to happen, the person who had put this prophecy down could say, look how right I was. I said someone would do that thing, and someone did do it. So, prophecy.
I feel like that
so
is
vague.
almost a trope in storytelling with prophecy, is that prophecies, first of all, have to be inherently vague. Nobody's going to get into the exquisite details in a prophecy. Say that this person who's going to do all of these things has brown hair and blue eyes, and they grow their facial hair to this length or whatever. It's usually just this person's going to accomplish some great feat. And overwhelmingly, it's typically like, well, if they don't, we're all going to die. So somebody had to. So in those cases, it's almost as if the prophecy is written for, if you don't do this, we're all going to die. Someone needs to step up. You're not a chosen person. You're just the person who chose to step up.
Yes, exactly. And you've also got, by the way, within that prophecy, you've got this wonderful bastardization of a proof by contradiction, in that if no one has yet stepped up and fulfilled the prophecy, it almost proves that the prophecy will happen one day. We just haven't quite got there yet. The thing about it being so broad, I believe that there's 4, although I could be wrong, that you meet failed heroes who came before you in this world, who were supposed to fit the prophecy all the way through, and they did everything that was required of them. But they failed. And as I understand it, some of them were more qualified than you were. Just you, if you go on to finish the game, you fulfill the prophecy. And there's 2 lovely things. One is you can tell the thing that you're supposed to do, the opponent that you're supposed to kill, you can tell them that you're not the subject of this prophecy. You can tell them that you were never chosen, and this is just a story. But at the same time, despite everything that stops you being being the subject of a prophecy in that game, despite everything that stops you being a chosen one, how do you survive that damn disease? Unless you were the chosen one. So you've just got enough of these little tidbits in that series, in those games, even when you're not the chosen one, to make you think you might be.
I think you just reminded me of the same kind of situation in Dragon Age Inquisition. When you're introduced to the main character in Dragon Age Inquisition, you're special, but nobody really knows why you're special. You're special because you survived, but you don't even know what it is that you survived. And so everybody tries to figure out what it is that explains your story, and it fits into a prophecy. So people decide you must be a chosen of Andraste. And you get to say at various points in the game, like, no, that's stupid. Or, yeah, I guess that must be it. But the events kind of play out the same regardless of how you choose. Because you're not so much the chosen one in the sense of the way the game plays out. It's just you, as the player, want to be a hero. And so you go through as a hero. You do heroic things. You save people. You progress through the game to try and figure out your own story. And in the end, you become the hero because you're making all of those choices yourself to say, I want to get to the bottom of this, or I want to do all of these cool things that, are the reason I bought the game. Doesn't really fit the narratives so well. But I think it's a really interesting example with prophecy to say that, like, yeah, the prophecy exists, but there's always the option to say the person who wrote the prophecy was just crazy.
Well, this is, I think, one of the interesting parts that I think will come up over the course of the podcast as we look at other people's examples, other characters' examples, is how many of the actions that your character commits during the game, how many of them necessitate the fact that they're a chosen one. There are a few things in Dragon Age Inquisition, I believe with the Fade Rifts, for example, that you have to be in some way special and chosen to have done this. But almost everything else that's politics in the game, you don't need to be a chosen one to do that. However, the fact that you are seen as being the chosen one by people around you, by other powers, etc., that just facilitates the way that you can do it, and how easy it's going to be, or how difficult it's going to be, and how people will react to you. So I think that's really what you would need in any of these games to prove that someone is a chosen one, that they are the clear subject of a prophecy that then goes on to become true, is how much of what they did could only have been done if they were that, as opposed to someone who was just very charismatic or very skilled or whatever the case may be.
Well, I think that's another interesting element of Inquisition, is that you're not so much the chosen one as much as you are an accident. I mean, the reality of Inquisition is that you are the chosen one because you survived something devastating and it left its mark on you, and now you have kind of unique powers. You weren't so much chosen by anyone deliberately, you were chosen by fate in the sense that you survived by chance. It's like saying that anybody in our world who survived a car accident is the chosen one because the car accident has shaped the person that they're going to become and has given them a unique insight on choices they will make moving forward. It's not so much a choice made by any individual person as much as you making the best of the situation.
Yeah, it's this question of the external and the internal. The Chosen One, I think, as far as we're defining it, is it's very much been imposed on you from the outside. You don't essentially have much choice. You have choice in how you use this power. There's a very famous Final Fantasy example where we might be able to discuss that. But if you just survive an event and you go on to then experience your self-growth and you change and you develop, it's all internal. And you're not the subject of this prophecy. You're not the Chosen One. You are just someone who did their best. And you see that as, I think, a recurrence then, between Dragon Age Inquisition and Mass Effect, where I don't really believe that Shepard was a Chosen One. I believe that Shepard was incredibly skilled, incredibly charismatic, one of those people to whom people gravitate, they're willing to follow, they're willing to listen to, they're willing to let lead. But really, their story is largely kicked into gear, and where it ends up by hazard and by chance with the Prothean beacon on Eden Prime. Something that they very nearly didn't end up having happen to them. It very nearly happened to our favorite space racist.
Or Caden, depending on...
I was just thinking, shit, which one is it?
He means Caden. Yeah.
You could tell that Com plays a male shepherd and Legion and I play female shepherd.
Is that the dividing line for who?
That's the deciding factor.
Oh, I like Mark Mears Shatner delivery.
Elder Scrolls is very difficult to discuss because of the lore and how deep it is and how interwoven some of the facts are, because some of them are facts and some of them are believed to be facts. But it's really hard for me to really comment on the Neverine, because he's not what you get in Morrowind is the reincarnation of the original. So when you have the goddess who was basically slighted by the Neverine's advisors, you look at Vivek, you look at Almax. Oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to look her up. But Sotha Sil and it was basically his wife. When they, in the Ashlanders text, they're the ones who killed him. And so because Azura, she was so upset about that, she actually turned the elves to dark elves. That's how they got their distinct pigment. Before that, they looked very much like high elves. So there's all this like interwoven pieces of the puzzle. And so when he's resurrected, that's why I'm saying it's like real hard for me to say that he's actually the chosen one or not chosen one, because he's actually the reincarnation version of the original. And so, yes, you had other iterations of it, but just like any good prophecy, look, I mean, you have Vivek and Sotha Sil and Alamaxia, I can't remember how to say her name. But anyway, Becky, they're basically taking over the mantle of godhood. They're demigods who became gods. And so because the dark elves don't want to, disrupt their situation and their peace, basically, they were able to, advance to where they are due to their actions. Vivek eventually becomes this more balanced character. He can't lie and he cannot not lie. He's always on two sides of the coin. That's why he's constantly levitating and standing. So he understands that there's a prophecy out there. But like any great writer here is going to understand is like, you don't want to just throw one iteration of this individual out there and now they know he's coming, so they have to deal with it. They throw curves. And so that's actually what happens in the Elder Scrolls, is that you have these iterations of this individual that has come and didn't actually happen. So yes, you have, like I said, it's hard for me to comment whether or not that person's actually the chosen one or not the chosen one based on the actual events that have occurred. Because when he actually arrives, it's basically Azura's still pissed off at the three. And then so she needs to make sure that they have vengeance come to them. But Mass Effect. So y'all are hitting on Shepard. I've always taken the position.
Choice of words.
I've always taken the position that Shepard is actually very special. It doesn't matter whether you play as an engineer or whether you play as an adept or just a soldier, whatever. But you remember, like, Caden has an issue with an L2. Caden and Shepard are basically the same age. He has an issue with an L2 implant. Shepard has no problems being a biotic at all. I just think that Shepard is actually very uniquely unique. I think Shepard is actually humanity 2.0. There's nothing that Shepard is. There's a reason why the Reapers look for Shepard. It's not that. I mean, Shepard's a human like anybody else, but they're looking for Shepard when they attack the colony that the Elusive Man gives us the information about in Mass Effect 2. They're trying to find a colony where somebody like Ash is stationed, so that way they can force Shepard out of hiding or wherever. They're trying to force the issue.
I think
That's when we start applying the Occam's razor approach to it. Is why do we apply this conspiracy to it though when it could just be random chance? And the biotics, I think, I'm sure I remember that Shepard actually isn't fitted with L2s, and I hate how far we're going down into this rabbit hole. I think they get L3s, and it's because they're fitted quite late in life, and I cannot remember where that comes from. But I know there's a conversation at one point where Caden is explaining the problems with L2s, and I think Shakwas does as well. And the way that Shepard's almost ignorant of it, it feels as though they can't have L2s. It must be that they have L3s, and that's where their ignorance about them comes from. The only other thing I wanted to add on top of that, by the way, was just I do think the ambiguity really helps as well. When you have a prophecy, the idea that it might be real, it might not be, this person might be the chosen one, they might not. That ambiguity is just so much tastier as well, especially because it leads you down that slight illusion as you're playing this game that you might fail. If the prophecy is just true and you fit it perfectly, there's no doubt, there's no stakes. But if it doesn't quite line up, if things are a bit off, there's always that little bit of extra doubt. Sorry, Banana, I cut you off.
Oh, no, you're fine. I was going to say, I think you're kind of touching on the gray area between the two. So, Skyrim, we have that clear definition. You're a Dragonborn. No one's even seen one in hundreds of years. You are special. You are unique, and you are in a position that no one else is. And that position relates to the story of the game. With Mass Effect, that entire situation becomes a little grayer because Shepard is chosen by Anderson at the beginning of the game. We haven't really suggested a limitation on who gets to make you the chosen one. So Shepard is chosen by Anderson, mostly because of Shepard's own behavior. Shepard earned the spot to be submitted as a Spectre. But he's chosen by Anderson. Mass Effect 2, he's chosen by Cerberus. Because of the events of Mass Effect 1, Cerberus invests an absurd amount to bring him back. He's chosen by Cerberus. Is Shepard a chosen one?
Well, that leads us down the frustrating rabbit hole of, I mentioned earlier, that what actions that your character commits necessitate being the chosen one. Well, in this case, without Anderson and the Council, he's not a Spectre. In this case, without that, we're not having the events of 2 and so forth. So, if Anderson has that power, Shepard is very much a chosen one.
Yeah, because if you look at the beacon on that they find at the beginning of the game of Mass Effect 1, a human is not supposed to survive that, but Shepard did. They looked at the amount of neurological signals that was being received, and I think even your physician says that should have killed you. But
I think Liara makes a comment about that when you explain to her the situation.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Now, also, I think someone like Link in Zelda, because I know Banana loves Zelda, but he's an interesting character because I wouldn't say that he's chosen, but he kind of is, because when you look at his relationship with Zelda, you know, because some people are like, well, they're actually brother sister, maybe they're not. What the only thing that is kind of referenced, I think, in some of the text is that they're destined. So he's destined for Zelda, whatever that means. So yeah,
I think it's not so much that the story is about a character who was chosen to succeed. It's the story is about whoever did succeed. And it's not so much that they were special. It's the events made them special. And then you get into later games and you finally get to Skyward Sword when they're like, oh yeah, it's all the same Link. I mean, not exactly the same, but it's the reincarnation of this legendary hero. And then he becomes a chosen one. And it doesn't feel great. Because up until that point, it was just, you're a hero because you choose to be a hero. And then when you get to that point where it's like, oh no, you are a hero. You've just been worthless for like 16 years and now you're getting into it. Because ultimately that's where it always comes down to for me with this kind of dividing line is, if you're a chosen one and then you start your adventure in your 20s or your 30s, what were you doing as a chosen one up until that point? Because up until that point, you're not special. The events that matter for you as the chosen one haven't started yet. So if you die as a 16-year-old and you don't get to be there, none of this happens. Potentially the world ends because the chosen one was irresponsible as a teenager. And I feel like for me, I've said I do love games that fall into both of these categories, but for me, I definitely lean towards a person who has chosen to step into the role of hero as a person who was chosen as a hero before they did anything.
Well, I think the interesting thing about Link, and I won't stay on Link for, ever, but well, there's a lot of things in his early life of why he's not doing anything is because everything where he grew up, he's not special. The fairies don't even choose him. He's supposed to have his own little fairy, but turns out he's not from there.
I'd like to think about the idea of a chosen one in these worlds. I like to imagine there are multiple, and that if Link hadn't done this, then someone else would have. And I think that's where, in my mind, I start reaching this distinction between a chosen one and the chosen one. So you will have a whole bunch of chosen ones, but only the one who then goes on to complete whatever said task is becomes the chosen one. And the easiest example I can think of for that is any of the Soulsborne games. So Dark Souls 1, in particular Dark Souls 3, and certainly Elden Ring, where you are one both in lore and in the sense of the meta of you playing with other people around the world who are all playing the game at the same time. You are one of many thousands, millions, whatever, of tarnished, of ashen ones, of chosen undead. If you think of your character, the chosen undead, you are the chosen undead from that very first moment when you are brought back. Sorry, you are a chosen undead from that very first moment when you are brought back. And you begin to go on this pilgrimage to Link the Flame. It's only in the act of doing it that you become the chosen one at the very, very end. In the same sense that we are all chosen as tarnished as soon as we pick up that controller and we start playing Elden Ring. We're chosen as tarnished. Already quite a special, narrow group. And this grace is actually bestowed upon us by this godlike figure. If this is undone in the DLC's lore, by the way, I apologize, I haven't played it yet. But you are given this outside virtue to go and change the world, to go and take the Elden Ring and become Elden Lord. But everyone got that. Everyone was chosen. It's only the one who gets to the end of the game and actually puts that rune together who becomes the tarnished, the chosen. So yeah, that distinction between the A and the interests me.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where I was going with our prophecy discussion is the prophecy kind of only deals with the end result. It Prophecies rarely ever suggest thousands of people are going to do this and fail, and eventually someone will succeed. Because nobody wants to hear that. They want to hear about the success. So a prophecy is somebody will accomplish this incredible feat. And you kind of become the chosen one by being the only person to succeed. You
Yeah.
were pretty much just another guy who tried, and if you had failed, you would have been no one. But because you succeeded, you've become the chosen one. And for me, that's way more compelling than you were given a task by God or fate or some higher power. So like if you watch if you watch the original Mortal Kombat,
I don't know what I thought you were going to say, but it wasn't Mortal Kombat.
if you play so I don't remember the timeline of everything. I believe Mortal Kombat and then Mortal Kombat 2 came out and then the movie came out. And in the movie, Liu Kang is literally chosen by a god to be the winner of the tournament. But in the video games, anybody can win the tournament. And the video games are what started everything. So I don't know why you went to this. No, only Liu Kang can do this. Raiden said so. When in the video games that you're basing the movie off of, anyone could have done it. Liu Kang was one of many.
Reminds me of Elder Scrolls, actually, when you were saying about he was chosen by a god. And I was thinking of this earlier when Legion was talking about it, and you forgot the name of the one god, or the one demigod. And that's what really had me thinking as well, of in that universe, there are so many demigods that it's almost a banality to be chosen by one of them to do something. So in that world, almost the sheer amount of damn prophecies and the sheer amount of divine interventions that take place, there's almost no chosen aspect to them. They're so haphazard. Because I'm just going to tell you what film I thought you were going to say, and it's probably a bit stupid. I thought you were going to talk about the movie The Sword in the Stone from, I think, the 1960s. That's exactly where I went. There was that idea of there are all of these people who will come and try and retrieve that stone. Retrieve that sword from the stone, or the sword from the anvil in the legend. And yeah, until someone does it, almost the presence of a prophecy, it can exist only because no one has succeeded yet in this one grand task that we're always desperate for someone to do. And it almost fulfills itself in the sense of, if there's a sword stuck in a stone and there's no prophecy that people are talking about that someone's going to pull it out one day, no one's probably going to try. No one's going to try, but as soon as the prophecy is put in place, all of a sudden, all these figures will then come along and try and do it. And it almost, causes itself to be fulfilled. And that's one of the things I found interesting about prophecy in video games, in books, in literature, in history, is, well, first of all, in history, a prophecy is almost always written after the events happened. We build it as a justification for what later took place, to add some form of legitimacy to what later took place. You'll find this almost in any historical account. We are very rarely lucky enough to have contemporary documents of things that took place. We tend to have documents from 50 years later, 100 years later, whatever it might be. So we have that beautiful narrative luxury. If we're writing in 1200 about something that happens in 1060, we can talk about that prophecy that came out in 1020 and how that justifies then what came later and then puts us in place to legitimize the rule of who came later. But yeah, that idea of an event that has a prophecy attached to it is almost put in motion by the very existence of the prophecy itself. The most prevalent one of those I can think off the top of my head is the series of prophecies in A Song of Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones, which really does have you questioning all the way through how much of this is prophecy and how much of this is just people desperate to fulfill and be the subject of said prophecy.
The prophecy and legend of Saint Calm.
I will write my history.
Saint Calm the Innocent.
Saint Calm the Innocent. We remember the joke in the last episode, right?
Yeah.
This doesn't.
The one that got edited out.
What?
I feel like prophecy and this kind of repetitive trope we see in every form of media with prophecy of this fulfilling a prophecy in a way that is not expected, that is without a doubt the gray area. Because as Com said, if the prophecy doesn't exist, there might not be that motivation to fulfill the prophecy. And so in a lot of cases, and even with, say the Sword and the Stone, when Arthur, I'm speaking purely on the movie at this point, not all of the variations of it. When Arthur lifts the sword out of the stone, it's not so much that he's the chosen one as much as he has fulfilled all of the requirements to remove the sword because of who he chooses to be. And when you realize that, like, the Sword and the Stone is essentially a kind of objective, kind of unknowable force making a decision on who should rule, it's looking for specific qualities. And Arthur has those qualities. And it's those qualities that allow him to pull the sword out of the stone. Is the sword choosing him, or did he choose to be the person that the sword would accept?
So is government directed by the people or some aquatic tart? Because
yeah, I didn't vote for it.
Help, I'm being repressed. I did just want to jump in. Sorry, I've got that scene running in my head now. Specifically, one line which just got very real after my last birthday. I was just thinking about how the prophecy in this case, and this is really stupid, but I'm going to dive in anyway. It almost feels like a cosmic form of hedging your bets. Let's say there's this sword stuck inside this massive rock somewhere, right? It's as simple as this. It's very stupid. The person who gets this sword out of this rock is going to have to be, at least in some sense, the strongest creature who's ever walked the earth to be able to do this. We can hedge our bets on this person by making a prophecy that the person who extracts this sword is going to be good. They're going to be a divine, wonderful ruler. Because otherwise, if it's just some gigantic prick who gets this sword out of the rock, he might go on to be awful. So we hedge our bets by saying this, no, you did great there. You did great. But look, the text, you're here to save us. Look, it says it, and you fulfill, you fulfill all of these criteria right here. And I just love that idea that it would be done by people around the world just looking at incredibly difficult tasks and just saying, right, if someone can do this, we've got to really make sure they're not an asshole.
I just love the idea of orchestrating the Sword and the Stone test as an individual, so you personally get to choose who rules, as if it's like a little trick. And when the person you want to become the next ruler is, you release some mechanism that allows the sword to slide out.
That is what they do in Disneyland. That is what they do. It's a genius. I'm making notes.
And this is why I don't respect the government. Sorry.
From what I'm hearing from both of you is that you tend to prefer games that where the hero is more or less stepping into their role because of their actions and the way that they've developed and things.
Can I offer a qualified yes in that you're entirely right, but how did you get that from the nonsense that we're just saying?
I feel like about a half an hour ago I was pretty clear about this. Since then I've been less clear and less about this.
Speaking of which, Star Wars.
Yeah.
Sorry, but yes, I think I would agree.
Well, like I think of games like Diablo, for instance, that have a really interesting, intricate story that aren't really tied to any prophecy at all whatsoever. But you do have a character or two that has been, well, you have a different hero in each game. So in one, the lore hero is basically the son of the king who is able to defeat Diablo. He goes through quite a bit. And the other two heroes that you have, the mage and the rogue, have their consequences that you find out in Diablo 2. But the original hero that we have, becomes the wandering person in Diablo 2. So you have a different hero in Diablo 2. And Diablo 3, you have a Nephilim. But my point here is that the hero changes. And so the theme of the game is more or less to defeat the evil that's out there. So it is a very different game in that regard, because it lets you kind of pick your narrative, but at the same time, it actually has certain structure to it that allows it to not rely on just the developmental hero, because there is a certain element of somebody has to be in this position in order to do, especially Diablo 3, because you have the Nephilim that reemerge. So
a lot of this, it comes down to a way that video games are quite archaic. So if you think of an example of the way that we look at the world and the way that we write history in the modern day, we tend to avoid attributing too much to one person. We tend to look at how the world was shaped by economic factors, how the world was shaped by social factors. Essentially, it's Marx's history. Essentially, the idea of people having more power than persons. The great man of history idea essentially largely being consigned to the dustbin of said history, with some individual exceptions. And video games, just for the sake of having a narrative, need to have that great man. Because it's all well and good that Sephiroth must fall. But it's a shame if the reason Sephiroth falls is an economic reason stemming out of Midgar's lack of control over its grain exports. Or imports, in the case of Midgar. So you almost have like this idea of the heroic figure in video games necessitates these prophecies, necessitates this individual heroism, which we don't really find always in other forms of media nowadays, because we deliberately try and avoid it. I hope that made sense.
It's funny that that's how you transition to Final Fantasy VII, because I was thinking of like every heavy-handed segue that I could make. Like, what other series has a unique main character in every game?
No, it's grain. It's grain.
Yeah, that's the segue.
I guess for me, it's a little bit of both.
Oh, he's going to drag us back.
Yeah. It's a little bit of both. I do appreciate the prophecy hero, because when it comes to like lore, you have to have a lot of things happen in order for those things to work. I mean, you have any kind of inconsistent lore, it's just not going to work. It's going to be called out. It's going to say, hey, that you said he had to do this, or you said that she had to do this, and it didn't happen that way, or whatever. People are going to poke holes into it all day. But there are certain characters to me, like Samus, for instance, who aren't born special at all, tying well genetically with advancements that other species that she was raised with can do for her. And so that becomes exponential with the technology that gets incorporated with what she has and her lore and her history and stuff. I'm trying to be not too specific, but at the same time, because if I go down the whole lore tree of Metroid, then we're never going to end. But my point here is that she, yeah, but she's very definitely a character who becomes almost a person of prophecy, even though her baseline character is nothing special at all.
Well, I mean, this is what we've largely discussed, though, isn't it? It's that idea of stepping into the shoes of prophecy as opposed to having been the prophesied one in the first place. And that's, as we mentioned, is really what we find more interesting as a whole, is those characters who are willing to do that. And if I can briefly drag us into that world, which I think Banana might have done, judging by the look on his face
I was ready to go,
is Final Fantasy VII. A game where your character, and we really do have to step around the spoilers on this one, I believe, because this is quite formative for the story as a whole and for a first-time enjoyment of the narrative. Your character is not special. They, in many ways, make themselves to be special. They, in many ways, have something about them that is a bit different. They, in many ways, have something about them that's magnetic to others. But if we're looking for someone who fulfills a prophecy, someone who is the chosen one, someone whose powers are out of this world, someone who almost could never have had a normal life, it is very much not your protagonist. in Final Fantasy VII. If they had done something else, the world wouldn't have been missing its great hero. Someone else could have taken that role. Bizarrely, there is someone in that game who does fit pretty much all the bill for the great prophesied hero. And who is it, Banana?
Aerith. I mean, also
There are two people.
Yeah.
Of course, but they're two sides of the same coin.
Right.
Sorry, I'll leave you with the
I think it's interesting that you brought up Samus's kind of genetic predisposition.
Are you betraying me here?
Oh no. We'll tie it back in. Because that is kind of an interesting idea that really, really just utterly destroys the line between these two for me. Because we think of kind of a genetic predisposition as in the current in the context of, you know, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, it's kind of your parentage that makes you special, without going into more detail. And what is your parentage beyond kind of your genetic predisposition? But in the real world, your genetic predisposition is kind of evolution choosing you, which is, again, not you so much being special as much as you being weirdly kind of predisposed to surviving specific environments.
Mm-hmm.
And when you take that and put that into the context of Final Fantasy VII, your main character is introduced as special. They are ex-soldier first class Cloud Strife. They are presented as special immediately. And then when you play through the game, you'll find out, without going into detail, they're special, but not in that way. There's something very, very special about them in a way that's not true for Sephiroth, not true for Aerith. But it's not framed as a positive thing. You're introduced to this specialness as a flaw. And weirdly, it kind of elevates you into this position where you are the chosen one. Because you were so not the chosen one. And I think that's where this all kind of falls apart. Is we look at these, and if you change the scope on any of these things, the chosen one becomes meaningless. Because what seems to be the chosen one for us at the beginning of the game really isn't that special. And then it turns out to not even be true. And then it turns out to be true in a very different way. And it basically comes back to that point where it's not because you were special, it's because you made decisions utilizing what makes you special. And everybody has something that makes them special. And they have the ability to leverage that in a way that might put them into a position like this. So you have a hero who is a chosen one, and he almost kind of abandons what makes him a chosen one to become the chosen one. And it's maybe that's why I love that game, because it completely and utterly destroys the idea of destiny, of fate, of being born special, and makes it a choice to be special.
We're going to take, well, not us, but I think the community as a whole is going to take that little speech that you just gave, put that over swelling motivational music, and that will be all over YouTube sooner rather than later.
For me, I could give you a same, goodness, it's the inverse of what you're saying, but the same result. Dave the Diver. Dave the Diver is nothing.
Oh, you better be very careful about spoilers right now.
Yeah, also I'm getting real go on energy.
Yeah. Dave the Diver, of course, nothing, but he takes advantage of the things he's good at. He doesn't even know he's good at them, but he starts doing things, and he's doing very superhuman things at the end of the day. So, like I said, it's kind of like the same result, but he actually starts from a very different starting point. But it's kind of like those two examples, like very polar opposites, they come together at the same end point, though.
I'm fixated on the idea of me ranting about Final Fantasy VII becoming this inspiring speech. I was like, I'm going to go back and watch this episode and be like, what the fuck was I talking about? And then Cobb's like, that was so inspiring.
I feel like I really need to go and do something today. But that I think it is just inherently more interesting as far as I'm concerned. Possibly you could have the individual who is special and doesn't know it. You could have the individual who is special in some kind of way and doesn't really understand it. So they think they're great at one thing, but actually it's another that's going to go on and define them. And then, and then that final option of the individual who does not believe they fit into any sort of prophecy at all, but somehow rises to the occasion and then fills the boots that are needed there. I think for me, that's really where the story that I want to read is found. And I think almost everyone would probably find themselves agreeing with that, because someone who fits neatly into a prophecy, fulfills that prophecy, and goes on to be known as the individual who fulfilled that prophecy is inherently boring. It's just done, it's dusted, we're kind of finished with that. And that's also where, to drag it to a game we haven't talked about yet, Final Fantasy VII, the real joy of Sephiroth's character, just briefly, is that they really should fulfill any prophecy that you could possibly have. They are born special. They live special. They are made to be special. And they are. But they get everything wrong. They walk
they're
down
a prick.
Yep. That's my word. Yeah, that's it. That's it. They should, but they're a prick. And as a result, they do not fulfill any of these things. And I love that inversion too, the character. And again, it is a cliche, but my goodness, almost everything in story is a cliche. If we're going to hammer on those, we've got a lot of things to complain about. But the individual who should fulfill the prophecy and falls from it, that's got some joy for me as well.
And I think that weirdly is what makes my favorite Final Fantasy game my favorite, which is Tactics. The main character in Tactics is a bastard child born to nobility. And because he is a bastard child, he is not respected in the same way his brothers are. They are treated as true nobility, and he is treated as black sheep. And he goes through this incredible story. He goes on this absurd journey that turns the world upside down. And at the end of the story, the only person who knows the truth writes it down, and it disappears. It's forgotten. The reality of the story is only kind of concretely proven in the results that it has. Nobody remembers their names. Nobody remembers the details of the events. But the main character, who wasn't really special, or was special in a way that was negative, ends up becoming this legendary hero, but the legend doesn't include their name. And I think it's this weirdly satisfying anonymity that he ascends to this role of somebody who has completely reshaped the way the world is. He basically dismantled one of the greatest conspiracies in existence, and he's forgotten. And it sounds depressing, but it's not. It's weirdly satisfying.
Every time you talk about this game, I really mean every time, I want to play it. It's just, talk to me, tell me where to get it, and I'm going to play it.
I will set you up with completely legitimate means to play this game.
I look forward to these completely legitimate means to play the game.
Last game, I guess, on my side of things is Ghost of Tsushima. You know, you do start off with You're born in nobility. You're trained. You're highly trained. You know the world to be a certain way, and then the world is basically taken away from you. And so it's up to you to really decide what values are important to you. And you kind of discover a lot of the things that you were raised as, values that you should always uphold, regardless of the scenario. You're having to bend some of those rules in order to make your way and reestablish the form of life and the principles that you do hold. So you have to break those rules in order to reestablish the way maybe that you think it should be. So it's really, there's so many stories interwoven in that game that really beg the question of, are you a hero? And are you still a hero despite having to break those rules? So
sadly, a game that I didn't really bounce off, but I got a few hours in. I think I remember. I think my controller died mid fight, and I got annoyed and petulant, and then never played it again. But that is a game that I would love to go back into. It really was warming up and looking like it was going to be very, very interesting. But I just never quite got back around to it.
I feel like that weirdly reminded me of Sekiro, and that played into some of the other discussions that we've had so far of one of the more compelling elements of a main character for me. I've noticed throughout this discussion is a main character who is special because they're a failure. Like a main character who fails at their primary goal early in the story and then has to rise above that failure, improve themselves, fix a mistake, potentially save the world from their own negative consequences of their original failure, is way more compelling to me than somebody who was born special with a power that no one else has. And I don't think I realized that until we started talking about it.
But it makes sense that failure and redemption would be much more interesting than success and applause.
Yes.
yeah, I'm trying not to be too specific about Ghost of Tsushima, but there are instances where you're told, you're raised, always face your enemy, make sure it's a man-to-man fight. But you have cutscenes where you remember things of how you were told and how you were taught. And then the first thing you do right after that is have to backstab somebody in a stealth. But you say to yourself under your breath, forgive me, Father, but he has to do what he has to do. And that's what I'm saying, is that there are very specific instances where you're breaking your principles. So even if at the end of the day, you're able to reestablish the world the way you think it should be done, you had to break those principles. So are you still truly a hero at the end of the day? Because in order to get the world that you wanted, you didn't use the rules that you were trained to from, early on to do. It's a great game. So
Well, that's where that great interest in the idea of high-minded principle meeting the cold reality of whatever it might be that you have to do. And I think we haven't talked about it before, so it's a bit odd to have a second reference to it in the same show. But it's not Final Fantasy. I could see the twitch in Banana. It's Game of Thrones again, or Song of Ice and Fire. But there's this one really nice line of dialogue, and it's to do with one of the main characters not wishing, as they lead their army, to torture their opponents. They're going to set a better example. Because how can you fight for honor and how can you fight for purity if you're not exercising it yourself? And they're told by one of their more pragmatic commanders that the high road is a pretty place, but you're going to have a hard time marching your army down it. And I thought that's a really wonderful line of dialogue that just summarizes so many ideas about, principle and reality. And I do like to imagine that in any game where you have a hero, I want to have something that tars them a little bit. I want to have something where a choice had to be made. And if it's a game where we have true choice, let me have the other option too. Let me take that high road, but make it harder for me. Make me fight for it. Let me see that moment where principle meets reality.
I think that point you made about Ghost of Tsushima, where you have to kind of abandon your principles in order to create a better world, reminded me very much of a line in the movie Serenity, which is the closing movie of the Firefly series. And I think the reality is this is a line delivered by the primary antagonist of this movie, who is this incredibly capable, almost assassin who operates in the shadows and kind of eliminates threats to this authoritarian rule. And he says, I want to create a world where men like me don't exist. And that's not verbatim what he says, but that's the idea, is I am going to do things that I know are heinous and disgusting and do not suit my principles, because the result is no one will ever have to do them again. And I think that showcased in that moment, this person could have been the hero of the story if it were told differently. And I think that's what a lot of these games are really doing, is showing that what we think of as a hero really comes down to perspective. And it's not so cut and dry.
Again, inspirational music at the end of Banana speech here.
We've got two from one episode.
Yeah.
Join me on my philosophy podcast.
But yeah, any closing thoughts or comments?
We didn't remain entirely within the purview of what we set for ourselves, the idea of prophecy and that hero, the chosen one or the one who steps up into it. I think we've branched out a bit more into discussion of the hero as a whole. And I do believe that the main thing that we hit upon throughout and thematically is that the flawed hero is much more interesting than the pure hero. In the same way that, as Banana just said, the villain who has that touch of good within them, or maybe a touch of pragmatism or realism, whatever it might be, that touch of logic to what they do, the justified villain is always more interesting. So what I want from my games is good villains written well, good protagonists written well, where there's just a little bit of crossover in between them. And I could imagine playing a game from the other perspective.
Yeah, God of War would be way up there for that.
I feel like this is one of the weird episodes where we've actually offered genuine advice on storytelling in a game. To say that I will care a lot more about a video game if the main character is flawed but doing their best, and the villain is legitimately trying to achieve a goal that they genuinely believe is positive, and the way they go about it from our perspective seems horrific.
I want a hero who's not sure he's the hero and a villain who's not quite sure he's the villain.
I mean, overwhelmingly, it seems like a villain who is convinced he is the hero is one of the most compelling story elements in any media.
Yes, I am absolutely on board.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, appreciate everybody's input today. And of course, anybody who's listening to the podcast, we are on YouTube as well. So you're able to kind of see these two lovely faces, and you can make comments on our video as well. And
if you're not on YouTube, he pointed to himself and com.
Yeah. So tell us, give me suggestions, maybe any games that we missed or anything like that. Definitely try to read those, and we always reply to them. So anyway, without further ado, we'll check you guys later. Thank you very much.